aiming to reach 1,000 young people. Our session today is joined yet again by another exceptional panel of speakers from the UNCCD Global G20 Land Initiative. Today we have Dr. Murali, our director, as well as the Ensamante from the Steering Committee on Climate, the National Coordinator of the Indigenous People. Kicking off the session, I will call to the center stage Dr. Morelli to give us a brief introduction.
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those who are joining from around the world to join the Generation Restoration Dialogues. As Kelly mentioned, we are on the G20 Global Land Initiative, which is based at the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification in Bonn, Germany. This initiative emerged out of a decision at the G20 Leaders Summit in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in 2020, when Saudi Arabia was the president of the G20. The leaders committed to an ambition of 50% reduction in land degradation by 2040. Going by the statistics of what was degraded land in 2020, we estimate that a 50% reduction in degraded land by 2040 will have to translate to restoring 1 billion hectares of land globally by 2040. And 1 billion land is an absolutely massive size. If you were to compare that, then you're looking at the size of the United States or China. So it is that massive land which we have to restore. That's a commitment which the G20 leaders made. Now, G20, as you know, is a group of then 20 members, 19 countries and European Union. And since India presidency in 2023, it also includes the African Union. And between these 19 countries, they control about 80% of world economy, 85% of world trade, 66% of global population, and 60% of global land. So this group is uniquely poised to make such global commitment. In fact, collectively, they have committed to more than 400 million hectares of land to be restored in their own territories. So yet another major commitment from them. If you are to look at the median cost of land restoration, which is about $1,500 per hectare, then you are looking at translating 1 billion into $1.5 trillion, which need to be spent to achieve the leaders' commitment of 50% reduction in degradation, which is 1 billion hectares restored. What does that mean? We will need to almost evolve an entirely new industry to lead to this land restoration of this scale. Land restoration is really nothing new. Historically, land was always consumed, and when there was not enough understanding of the land, it was often degraded, such as for farming, such as for cutting wood for other purpose. But when human population was relatively low and the consumption was low, the land always recovered by itself. But once the human population started to increase and the level of consumption increased, naturally the degradation started happening at a scale faster than its degradation. And the restoration was not faster than its restoration, and therefore degradation started accumulating. So if we have to meet the 50% commitment, we have to make conscious action to a tune of $1.5 trillion. We at the G20 Global Land Initiative, this is the aim which we have. How do we reach 1 billion hectares? How do we generate the $1.5 trillion to meet that requirement? Restoration always has been undertaken when it was consciously done at a very local level, often at small scales. A farmer trying to restore his or her own land, an NGO trying to restore their property, a community trying to restore their property. But if you have to reach 1 billion hectares, that will not do. Restoration will need to go to scale, and scale in absolutely massive level. And this is why we are promoting the concept of what we call the restoration industry, where land restoration is seen as a business, that the business use the type of skills and tools which it has to achieve restoration. We need to create economic incentive so that the private sector start to get interested in this topic. So we have a range of activities where we are working together with the industry, with the young people who want to start up on land restoration, so that restoration activity goes both global as well as massive. So it is into this restoration landscape that we are inviting you to join today for this very interesting webinar, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Murali, for a wonderful introduction into land restoration at large scale. So I would like to kindly remind you guys to please drop your questions in the Q&A box as always. So we are glad to accept them. So next up, I introduce you guys to our steering national coordinator from Kenya, and Samante.
Thank you very much, Kili. I hope you can hear me, right? You can, right? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm truly honored to be part of this conversation. And I'm so happy to see most of you here. So to begin off, first of all, thank you, Dr. Murali, for giving that background information, or for giving that introduction to this exciting topic of land restoration. And first of all, I want to totally agree with him on many aspects. I think restoration is nothing new, especially for us indigenous peoples. Actually, we want to give an indigenous people's perspective and how we can contribute to that vision. So, as well put by Dr. Murali, this is not anything new for us. This is something we have done for generations. And the results have been good until things started changing, or new things or new challenges, so to speak, came on board. So, but it must be also acknowledged that these efforts, for example, indigenous people's efforts to land restoration has in many times been interfered with by aspects like the climate change, for example. And I'm happy that this discussion is also linking to climate justice. For indigenous peoples and our contribution mostly to land restoration, and also to reducing the impacts of climate change, or at least to contributing to the conversation around climate change, our contribution has always been on the indigenous people's knowledge. And this knowledge has kept us around most of the time. The big question that comes around, especially for some of the communities that are truly at the verge of suffering from this crisis, climate crisis, and also land degradation, is that how have you been surviving? How have you managed to be around for this long? And like how? And for us, and that is what I want all of us to borrow or to tap into, is the issue, it's the aspect of indigenous people's knowledge. this is the knowledge that is mostly undervalued, mostly not brought into discussion when we are talking about, for example, the land restoration efforts. This is the knowledge that most of the time, looks at with a perspective of backwardness, this is backward. And even when we talk about the need to integrate this, most of the time it's not taken. And so if we need to achieve the objective that we are here talking about, land restoration, this knowledge we can only add more value to it. We can only integrate it into our systems, and we can only use it as the backbone for climate resilience and land restoration for us as indigenous peoples. And linking this to the youth, we know that, of course, there's that gap between, the knowledge holders who are the elders and at least middle age. But there is need to link the youth with this knowledge, because remember, the youth are drivers of change. They can easily translate this or integrate this into the scientific world that we are talking about. Youth are in a better position because they are tech savvy, if I can say that, and they can even document, because another challenge that has been there is that as much as this knowledge is of much value, there has been a challenge when it comes to documentation. And the reason we really need to have the youth in the whole picture is to ensure that there's intergenerational transfer of this knowledge. And you cannot, for example, have the youth there and talk of intergenerational transfer of knowledge when, the land degradation itself is causing the youth to flee away from the villages because of lack of unemployment, or not lack of but unemployment, or rather low income. So if we talk of restoration, then we need to talk about, creating livelihoods at the community level, because that is equal to restoration as well, so that the youth can be able to be in a better place in terms of income, that they can now serve from where they are. The rural urban migration, for example, for the youth has really created a big gap. There's a risk of that gap leading to loss of this knowledge. And as I said earlier, when youth are empowered, when youth are brought to the center of discussion, then definitely, for our case, definitely they are going to be heirs of this knowledge. And then again, still on the how we can contribute to this objective is by supporting the initiatives already that are there for indigenous peoples, rewarding their efforts. They have been stewards of nature. They have managed, I think, historically, all the land that is managed by indigenous peoples has proved to be, to be in good condition to date. And so if they have managed to achieve that much without much support, with all the risks and challenges they are facing, being in the forefront of climate crisis, and their lands being degraded due to many factors, including change in land use, which is becoming another critical element, then how much more would they achieve, for example, if some support is sent their way? So it's a series of actions. It's a series of action, including ensuring that there is that kind of direct support for their initiative, for their efforts. Rewarding their efforts in many ways and supporting their efforts, and also by also ensuring that. There are policies in place that will help support them in areas like safeguards and FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, and all this will lead to adding to their efforts in land restoration. As I started off, it's not something new. Land restoration is not something new, but there are so many challenges that have come around that definitely will limit or undermine this talk of mobility. For example, from the pastoralist community, if the moment you limit that kind of mobility, then what happens next? What happens is land degradation. And so if we need to restore this, and we need to achieve to our objective of restoring as much land as possible, then it means that we must support these communities in their own, livelihood system, in terms of ensuring that this mobility is not interfered with. Otherwise, it undermines the climate resilience. And when I talk about, anything interfering, for example, with mobility, is on climate finance, for example. A lot of climate intervention, trying to, climate mitigation, for example, efforts, renewables, while they can contribute to supporting the communities in even the land restoration, but if not done in the right way, can, on the other hand, undermine climate resilience and, of course, the efforts towards climate land restoration. And so it's not just climate finance, and it's just that not that the whole world is moving this direction, but it is taking into consideration those that have continuously put a lot of effort toward ensuring that this restoration happens, and ensuring that we are able to, as much as they contribute almost 0% of, for example, greenhouse gases. But again, remember, they are at the forefront of these challenges. So just that, I was just giving a background on how we can be supported so that we can continue what we have always been doing the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Samante. It was a lovely lecture, and I really enjoyed hearing your thoughts, and I'm pretty sure our participants would have also enjoyed hearing your insights on indigenous communities' participation in land restoration. Now, we will take questions from the participants. Please drop your questions in the Q&A chat box, and it can address both Dr. Murali and Samante. And I will also mention, we'd also like to mention that unfortunately, Marinol couldn't join with us today due to her sickness. So please pardon her absence. We will now move forward with the questions.
So we do have the first question, which is dedicated to Anne Samante. So Anne, your first question says, how have indigenous land management practices contributed to resilience in the face of climate change? And what can the global community learn from these approaches?
I lost you at some point, Keely.
Okay. It's okay, I can repeat it. It says, how have indigenous land management practices contributed to resilience in the face of climate change? And what can the global community learn from these approaches?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question. And well, the first part of the question on how, the traditional, or how we have managed to how our practices have led to land management, or proper land management, or restoration. I think from my few points that I gave earlier, is at the fact that our knowledge has been able to hold us in place. Our knowledge, or the indigenous people's knowledge, for example, just take an example of pastoralists. For example, we normally have a rotational, a very well structured way of grazing our animals. That is rotation, what we call rotational grazing. And through the traditional governance system, because we also have our own governance system, it is very clear and put out there how this should be done in a very coordinated way. And so by doing that, that definitely means that once you, for example, move from one point to another, then it means that the chances of the grazing or livestock keeping leading to land degradation is by 90%, because you are not confined to one area. You are very well structured. During the dry season, you're supposed to move to this place. During the rainy season, you're not supposed to be in this way, because if you are together with the animals at the same place at the same point, then it means the grass is not going to grow well. For example, I'm just giving an example of pastoralism because I belong to that livelihood system. And so how we have contributed to that is through our knowledge. We are able to, for example, we know the cycle, the rain cycle, for example. And so that knowledge by itself has contributed to climate resilience, for example, because you end up that even though, of course, challenges have been there in terms of drought, the common rampant droughts that were never there. But again, because of that knowledge, we are able to be able to even foretell or be able to, what is it called? There's a better term. Yes. Yes, we can tell when the rains are coming. We can tell that there is no any rain coming, and because of that, we get better organized, and we adjust accordingly. So I would say that our greatest asset, our greatest contribution is the traditional knowledge.
Thank you, Anne. That was a very clear explanation. Now we have an open question. I think either you or Dr. Murali could take this question. So it's a question from Mr. Isaac. He's asking, how are civil society organizations being involved in land restoration processes?
Thank you. Civil society organizations globally have been involved in land restoration for as far as I can remember, because it is a local issue and the solutions are also very local. So there are tens of thousands of organizations globally. But institutionally speaking, the Decade for Ecosystem Restoration is the global framing for land restoration. And there are a lot of civil society organizations who are participating in what is called the land challenge. And we engage with them on a regular basis, both to understand their work as well as their challenges. Recently, we worked with a restoration information platform called Restore. They have over 40,000 civil society actors who have undertaken restoration and put that on a map. We recently conducted a global campaign to identify some of the best practice and give them an award. And we had over 1,000 NGOs who submitted their submissions. We have a separate track whereby we identify NGOs from around the world and give them a financial grant to achieve land restoration. And this is the last cohort. We had about 39 NGOs from around the world, and we awarded close to $500,000. So yes, there are NGOs across the world already involved. A very small fraction we know, and even a smaller fraction of that we managed to provide financial and other support. But this action is universal and ongoing, including community-based, youth-based, women-based, faith-based, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murali. We also have another question for you. Says, from Dr. Murali's description of industrializing restoration, how does it reconcile with indigenous practices? What is the way forward to scale indigenous practices, for example, petroralism?
Thank you. So the work which we are trying to do is the following. That we are trying to create other sectors where the industrial sectors can find restoration attractive, financially attractive. For example, the mining sector, where the mining industries degrade a lot of land, and the land then will have to be restored. Now, this need to be restored at massive scale, not 1 hectare, 2 hectare, etc. And the land has been degraded in a fashion which is not conventional. It is not by farming, it is not by pastoral action, or for natural situations such as forest fire. So it need deliberate, thought-through technical intervention. That's the sector where we think the restoration industry has a big role to play. We also think large-scale actors such as the forestry sector and the agricultural sector would have need for large-scale restoration industry actors. But when it comes to community-based activities, clearly the community will have to be involved and the traditional knowledge can be used. We also think that the community knowledge and the traditional knowledge is useful for the private sector to undertake their own restoration activities. For example, in Brazil, they have what they call a restoration mandate. A part of the agricultural land will need to be restored for them to hold the concession. In this case, whatever are the appropriate local and traditional knowledge for restoration would be extremely valuable, even though the restoration itself may be done by the large farmer. What we are also trying to do is to work with young people, including who are from the communities, NGOs, and those who have set up and trying to find a business of land restoration. And it could be, for example, improving agricultural practices. And it could be by traditional approaches, but by scaling it, by sharing it, by bringing it to other people, there may be a business case to be made. So these two are not incompatible, neither in scale nor in content. And we think it will be mutually beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murali. We have another open question. So this is about how to tackle social conditioning and cultural stigmas in society that works against climate change. For example, a lot of young people see value in learning the latest, social media trends, but are not interested in planting trees or petitioning against plastic use. So this question tries to tackle about bringing awareness, I believe, more about climate change and the youth working for it or advocating for it in that sense.
Thank you. I'll pass it on to Samantha.
No, yes, Kelly. Kindly let me have the question again. Sorry, my connection is very unstable, and I may need to use to stay with the video off kindly because my connection is quite unstable.
Sure.
Yeah, understand. So the question is about how to tackle social conditioning and cultural stigmas that's against climate change. So it's more about fighting against the social conditioning, and as well as to promote climate change as a global challenge, especially amongst the youth.
Okay, so basically, if I have to address that, and especially looking at our youth, for example, that is indigenous people's youth, or indigenous youth, I think that's the right term, indigenous youth. For over time, I come from a community, for example, like once the youth transit from primary school and they now get to higher education and all that, there's definitely the stigma that sometimes they face, especially when they tell of where they are coming from. And because these communities sometimes are, the challenges that these communities undergo are sometimes, when you say I come from this community, then somebody will look at you and say, okay, the community that, for example, were evicted from this and this place, they associate you with the challenges that they have over time had about you, for example, and that has created some form of stigma. But if we are to address some of those challenges, especially for the youth, then it's just a matter of championing, or for those of us, for example, who have had this advantage of being in these spaces, is to send the right messages out there and send the messages of us, for example, when it comes to land restoration. We are not victims only, but also send the positive side of our work, send, positive messages, and definitely the narrative will change, and people will come to appreciate, or people will come to appreciate our us in a better way, and that also definitely will reduce the stigma. And so it is just, it's just important that we support the right narratives out there. It is just important that we try to reduce that kind of stigma by ensuring that the injustices, for example, that are happening are reduced in a good to a good percentage. So it is a matter of changing narratives. It's a matter of showing the positive side of these communities. It's a matter of making the world come to acknowledge their roles also in for example, in climate in climate initiatives. So there's need to really put a lot of support, a lot of pressure, a lot of support, basically, especially to these communities, and we will reduce that kind of narrative.
Thank you, Anne. That was a quite clear explanation. And we have another question. I believe this is again for this could again be taken by Dr. Murali. So it is a question about how the G20 Global Initiative is planning to restore the 1 billion hectares of degraded land and foster a thriving restoration economy, especially when working with CSOs. I believe Dr. Murali has explained this, but if you have any more points to add to it, Dr. Murali, please.
Thank you. So our starting point was that even though there has been other initiatives in the past, such as the Bond Challenge, such as the Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, such as the land degradation neutrality from UNCCD, such as commitments under UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Why is that we are not making progress? And we identified a number of reasons for this. The first and foremost we identified is the lack of national legislations. So when you have only international commitments, they are not locally enforceable by the civil society or citizens. So having national legislation is a must, or almost like an enabler to achieve this. So we have to work on creating national legislation for which we have to both mobilize the community, including through civil societies and local communities, but also through awareness building at the parliamentarians level. We have to look at creating expertise for land restoration. Currently, there are not enough technical experts who are able to undertake similar work. So we need to increase their numbers in bulk. We also, as I mentioned, create a restoration industry to support this. So we are working on all these elements. And in all this aspect, we work with the civil society. For example, we work with the parliamentarians. We have a global change maker academy for parliamentarians. And each of these parliamentarians have their constituencies, and there are civil society actors in their constituencies. And some of the parliamentarians are actually having their own NGOs. So we translate this need to have national legislation through all channels, including through civil society, so that the civil society can put pressure on the government to enact such legislation. We have programs working with the universities to reach 1 million graduates by 2030 with the restoration education. So we are using multiple channels in the weak points which we identified and filling those gaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morelli. I see today we have a lot of questions coming in. This question is for Anne. It says, what role can partnerships between indigenous communities, governments, and international institutions play in ensuring that restoration initiatives are inclusive and equitable?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
So one way of doing this is creating partnerships and collaboration with indigenous peoples networks. We have networks at the national level, at the regional level. So it will be important if we can have this kind of collaboration with these networks, because networks are representative of many other indigenous peoples organizations, and so this will give us a chance to really have dialogue and get to understand how how these indigenous peoples our people can be supported. And so I would first talk about a need for collaboration, and secondly is by ensuring that participation of indigenous peoples in some of these initiatives that are ongoing. Sometimes we have seen that while other, for example, some international supporters have good intention, they would want to support, but again, sometimes the question is, where are they? Where can we find them? There's no that space whereby they are able to meet them and get to hear firsthand information about them. And so there's need to create spaces where our people can get that space to interact and to be able to put forward or put across their issues. So participation in some of these ongoing processes, ensuring inclusion and their voices are heard in person, having them there in person would be another way whereby we can create that kind of synergy in terms of collaboration. Still, it's in the spirit of collaboration and in the spirit of ensuring that they are not left behind in most of these elements. So I would say using existing networks because they are there, and also creating spaces and being intentional about having indigenous peoples in these spaces, especially when it comes to these platforms that are existing so far. Last year when we went to UNCCD in Saudi, COP16, it was the first time that indigenous peoples were actively being engaged at the UNCCD, and that was the first time that we got the caucus. And so using those platforms like now that caucus, for example, and many others that are existing, and of course I talked about the regional and national networks for indigenous people, that is having those spaces and getting that space to engage them will give them that chance to address that.
Thank you, Anne. I'd once again like to close off by thanking both our speakers for joining us, and also my co-host, Ati, who will be taking over for the Generation Restoration Dialogues. Ati?
Hi. So there was one last question that was in the chat, and we would like to address it now. So the last question was about exploring South-South cooperation and experiences, especially Latin American presence in global land restoration. So this will be our topic for next session on September 11th. So please do sign up for the webinar so that you hear more experiences and innovative technologies that the Global South is practicing for land restoration. And we have amazing speakers lined up for the next webinar. So to hear more about this, please do sign up. And I would like to thank once again both of our speakers for their amazing insights, expertise, and experiences. Your contributions truly enriched today's discussion. Thank you. And once again, thank you to all of the participants and your questions and for your presence. We hope you had some new perspectives and ideas to carry forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a blessed day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.